Hello, everyone. I'm John Higgins, contributing writer to Film and TV Now, and I'm delighted to welcome one and all to this interview special with Trip Jennings. And we're here to talk about his new documentary, Elemental: Imagine Wildfire, which has recently been given a theatrical release in the US. It's narrated by actor David Oyelowo and looks at the cause and effect of the devastating California wildfires, as well as the action plan of finding suitable preventative solutions to salvage communities in the environment. Trip, a warm welcome to you.
Thanks so much. Yeah, excited to be here. And I also just, yeah, we talk about California a lot, but boy,
Okay.
you're starting to really have quite the impact in the UK as well. I mean, dozens of homes burned in London last year.
Well, the big one, of course, was Grenfell, which is still a major thing, which probably was the most significant fire disaster in recent history. It sort of impacted a lot of people, and there's still a lot going on. There's inquiries and a lot of things from the family. But going back to your documentary, which I thought was absolutely fantastic. Now, I'm your basic fire marshal at work. I did the fire safety courses, and I'm well aware of the basic fire triangle of heat, fuel, and oxygen. So what did
Love it.
you
Cool.
what did you understand about the nature of fire before you made this documentary?
Mm. Yeah, that's a really great question. So when I was a student in college, I made like a student film about a fire that happened in Oregon, the state I live in. And whatever, we were college students, right? I was like a sophomore in college. And I learned a lot about fire. Fast forward 15 years, and a fire burned just outside of Portland, Oregon, where I live. And it was the first time in like a generation that Portlanders in this major West Coast city had uh, ashes falling on our homes and our cars and yards. And the public conversation that was happening, right, was just, I felt like it was so far from what I understood as the best available science, as like, you know, the real sort of direction that we should be going with this conversation around fire, and suddenly it affecting major communities on the West Coast. And so I set out, to sort of answer some of these questions about, and really I started to think about, there's a lot of really good things about wildland fire. We need fire in our forests, in so many of the ecosystems. And I kind of wanted to say, hey, everybody, like maybe let's look at this as an ecosystem cycle that always happens. And then the Camp Fire happened in California, which burned the town of Paradise. 19,000 structures were burned in one fire. 86 people died. And that totally changed everything for me. And I think for, people thinking about wildfire in general, said, how do we prevent this kind of a disaster from ever happening again? And that part of the film took me on a journey that I had no idea about. I really, we went to labs where they build homes and burn them down using, accurate wildfire conditions to figure out the weak points. We unearthed this archive footage from experiments that had been done 30 years earlier, where they burned entire acres of forest in northern Canada and the Arctic Circle to figure out how close a house needed to be to extreme fire like that to burn down. And I mean, the film really took a completely different direction within, just a few months of starting it than I thought it was going to take.
Hmm. So what I noticed, I mean, this is what I thought was fantastic, was the fact that it's the relationship of fire alongside nature and spiritualism, because we talk
Mm.
about the Yurok community, which is the native one. And what's interesting is they've lived with fire long before contemporary humanity. And what's interesting is how they're encouraged by the fact that they want to see fire in their community and everything else. So I was really fascinated by that dynamic, the fact that, the way that certain birds and certain animals will come back to burn areas. And, people can see that in documentary. So what were the key things that you learned from seeing this dynamic?
Mm. Yeah, I mean, I think from the Yurok, what I learned and just was reinforced over and over and over again is the Yurok are almost unique in the United States in that they are a native people who have never been displaced from their homeland. They weren't moved to a reservation in another state, hundreds of miles or thousands of miles away, right? So they have this relationship with fire that is deeper than I can ever imagine. And just being able to be present for that, and see, their relationship with fire, it's just so clear that this is a force that will be with us forever. As long as we live in these landscapes, there will be fire, right? We can fight fire and we can reduce its impact to our communities through firefighting, right? But we don't get rid of fire. So that leaves us with decisions about how we live with it, right? And so that's, I think, the quest of the film, after hanging out with the Yurok for a while, became, okay, how do we live and thrive with fire, right? And that was like, the impetus and the direction for so much of this film is like, okay, great. So what do we do? So if it's, we don't have hurricane fighters. We don't have snowstorm fighters. We do have firefighters, right? But I think we need to understand the limits of that. And that's so much of the quest of this film, right?
Yeah. So obviously, what's interesting is that although we see the devastation, we see the virtue of how fire can help the environment in specific ways. Now, what do you feel could be done to achieve, based on what you've learned in this film, what do you feel could be done more in achieving this balance so that fire can be contained without causing some of these extreme wildfire disasters that we've seen recently?
Right. So, if we want safety from fire, right? We want to reduce the risk of fire. We've got to stop focusing on the wildlands where the fire is always going to happen. And we have to focus on the things that we want to protect the most, our homes and our communities, right? So when my thinking really shifted during this production of this film, and specifically it shifted from, okay, how do we modify the wildlands? How do we modify the forests? How do we get, more fire on the ground and stop fire in the forests, right? To how do we change the design and arrangement of our homes to prevent them from burning, right? And so, this is something that we've done, and we've thought about from sort of fires that happen inside the box for a long time, right? We've thought about how do we have a kitchen fire and we reduce its spread, right? And so now what we're changing that to, how do we understand how homes catch on fire, right? So that's from embers. So often it's from embers blowing miles ahead of a fire front, finding a small, nook that they can nestle themselves with some fuel to catch on fire. So maybe your gutters, maybe your garden beds up against your house, maybe the vents in your attic suck those embers in and burn your home down from the inside out, right? So how do we switch our thinking from this big sort of war on fire to how do we modify our homes a little bit, the little things, the details to protect them from embers? And then that opens up so many opportunities, right? That allows us to reintroduce fire in a safe way to landscapes that haven't had enough of it because we've suppressed fire. That allows us not to feel that we have to cut down forests to protect ourselves from fire. And of course, cutting down forests releases carbon into the atmosphere because trees are made of carbon and they biodegrade when you cut them down. And that warms the climate and makes fires more likely, right? So how do we get out of this vicious cycle and actually focus on what we want to protect?
Mm-hmm. So obviously, my next question is two parts. First of all, has the Europe representation seen the film? And also,
Yes. Yeah.
have you got plans to show the film to government officials and politicians to formulate an action plan? Because very much environmental issues at the moment, it's not just about the danger of fire, it's about where we are with the tipping point in the climate change and everything else with all these G7 summits. So what's the state of play on your mandate to actually get this to the government's focus?
Yeah, so well, I'll take the first one first. So so yeah, the UROC folks have seen this film, and and we had UROC advisors sort of along with us the whole way. We really wanted to represent them well in a way that they felt was accurate. And I learned so much about fire from Margot Robbins, Rick O'Rourke, a lot of these Yurok tribal members. I wanted to make sure that they felt like we got it right. And so we actually ended up changing the film from its first iteration. After we thought we were done, we premiered it at film festivals, and they said, okay, you're close, but not quite. And I wouldn't have opened it up for anybody else, but we did open it up for them. We added a few minutes. We explained some nuance. And so now I was just doing presentations and kind of all over the country we're bringing Yurok folks along with us because they add so much depth of knowledge to it, right? So yeah, we're buds, and we're going to stay friends, and we're going to keep working to sort of push this idea, right? That we need to protect our homes and communities, and we need to add fire back to the landscape and prescribe burns. So what's our plan for getting it in front of government agencies is a great question. We are working sort of state by state in the US. We've got a lot of pretty local, Oregon Congress people. We've got a whole bunch of people in California to see it. And we're working on Washington, D.C. screening, right? So that's where we invite a bunch of people from Capitol Hill. And we almost had that happening this week, but then the debt ceiling talks, which I think people around the world have heard about, kind of scuttled that plan and postponed it. Mm-hmm. So it's this always moving target, but we're constantly working with local community groups who see this film and say, my representatives need to see it, to organize screenings. And that's sort of the next phase and challenge of this, right?
Okay. So obviously you've been working with National Geographic for over a decade. I mean, their brand is this type of thing. I mean, how supportive are they as an organization, and where do you feel you've developed through their support as a filmmaker, I should say?
Gosh, I mean, so much of my career has evolved during this relationship with National Geographic, which has been amazing, right? I've filmed wildlife in, sort of all over the world, specific natural history shows about orangutans and about hornbills, and also explored paddled rivers all over the world, and made films about it for Nat Geo. And honestly, I think like so much of that informs the way that I approach filmmaking now, which is this combination of, I always want to include beautiful natural history in the films, but for me, I need a human story. I need to explain that with the smartest people in the world, right? And so I think that's kind of what you get in Elemental. And in terms of this film, National Geographic provided seed funding through a grant. And we haven't collaborated too much since then. We've been talking to National Geographic folks about our DC screening and sort of how to get elected officials there, and how to get it out there. And they've been really helpful. So yeah, it's been great. I mean, and having the name, of course, helped. National Geographic was the first funding that we got for this film too. Got a grant, seed funding to start this work. And boy, it is a lot easier to raise the rest of the funds for a film like this when Nat Geo is the first one to support you.
Mm-hmm. So obviously, I was just reading up on the film itself. I mean, I understand that you've received over 400 unique inquiries about the film. And I just was curious to know, what are some of the things that people connect with? What are the common things that people connect with from your inquiries? When people approach you about the film, and what are the common things that they sort of say they want to use it for?
Yeah, well, that's a great question. And we, man, when you make a film as a director, you want people to watch it and say, I need my friends to see this film. And I wasn't expecting quite such a strong response in that way as we've gotten. Like, it really seems like I think a lot of people are anxious about climate, the way that the climate's changing, the way it's going to affect them, and especially specifically people who live in fire-prone areas are concerned about the risk that they're experiencing, that they see on the news. So often we see fires, close by, they make the news. Thankfully, not in our community, right? But we know it's coming. And so I mean, I feel like people do have this deep need to understand what to do. And most of the media that you see out there highlights the problem and does not offer a solution.
Okay.
But this is an issue in which there is a solution. It's clear. We prepare our homes and communities. We build in the right areas in the future. We retrofit, every home that we can in fire-prone landscapes, and we will be way safer, and we could probably eliminate this community-wide destruction risk. And so that's what people are resonating with. They're saying, this is something I can do. I don't have to worry about climate change through inaction, right? I can take action. So many of these things start with a weekend project. So we get inquiries. I want to show it to my bridge club. I want to show it to my garden club. I want to show it to my class. We have Native people saying, thanks for, highlighting this indigenous knowledge. I want to show it to my tribe. And, we have people who almost lost their homes saying, I got a really big screen TV. I want to just invite all of my neighbors over to watch this because it needs to get out there. So it's pretty cool. It's pretty exciting. But we also have firefighters and first responders saying, I need my whole department to see this. I need, the fire marshals to see this film. So that's been really cool and exciting too.
Well, I have to say, just following on from that, because there is a thing later on in the film, which we won't reveal, which is quite interesting about how somebody prevented a situation, which I think is great. But also, but you have to tap into the whole thing. Two final questions for you, Trip. Now, the film has been done in collaboration with a wide range of organizations. I mean, I was quite fascinated. I'm just looking through the list now, and this is quite surprising because it goes California Fire Safe Council, Western Fire Chiefs Association, the American Red Cross, the Insurance Institute for Business and Home Safety, the NASA as well. I mean, following on from that, I mean, obviously, when somebody like NASA approaches you, what did they want to? What were they keen to address in that?
Well, NASA does a lot of remote sensing, obviously. That's kind of their deal, right? They have geostationary satellites. They have satellites, moving around the Earth. And they use this imaging to inform so much about the world and how we understand it, right? And they are looking for ways to connect what they do with sort of boots on the ground. And we're constantly having these conversations, boots on the ground. And so they're less, well, we use some of their imagery in the film, which was great and very helpful. But we've been less specifically engaged on like the film and the film production and the distribution with them, and more engaged in saying, okay, cool, what do we do now? Like, what do we do with these relationships that we've built? And so, helping them understand, because we're showing the film and we're having people come to us and say, this is fascinating, I do this interesting thing. And so we're trying to sort of be this connector and conduit, where we say, hey, NASA, y'all are working on this cool thing. These folks are working on this really interesting thing. I think there's some cool synergy here. And we're trying to do the best we can to tell stories about it. Okay. Right. So it's cool. I mean, I love how NASA is really, trying to bring this not just from a space program. They're not just going to the moon, right? They're also helping us understand the Earth that we live on.
Okay. My final question is basically a more personal one, but obviously, what are you most proud of about this documentary?
I am most proud of the reaction that we get from fire survivors and firefighters, because firefighters and fire survivors, they both frequently say after they see the film, thank you for creating a story that helps communicate my experience as a fire survivor so that I don't have to repeat it over and over and over again. And, you know, the fact that we got it right enough that people who have lived through some of the most traumatic, terrifying experiences of their lives thank us. I mean, that feels like a real accomplishment to me as a filmmaker. And the other thing is firefighters, by the same token, they say often, thanks for communicating the limits of what we can do. Because I don't think, like, firefighters are heroes and they save so many lives and homes and property. But there are limits. And as a firefighting organization, I don't think it's easy to communicate that to the public. Like, we expect firefighters to save us. And so often they do. And in certain conditions, when the wind and the climate and the heat and the humidity are such, there's just nothing that they can do other than help people leave, right? And that's something that we've heard a lot of people say, hey, thanks. That's hard for us to say. We can't necessarily say it, but we have to understand that in order to move forward and be safe.
Mm-hmm. Well, I just want to end with a comment about the film, and it's the first 10 minutes of the movie, which is raw iPhone footage of one family. Now, this is not visual effects. This is not backdraft. It's not something like that. This is genuinely real footage of a family trying to survive and how it happened. So if you do get to watch this movie, just hold your attention. It's absolutely fantastic. So, Trip, on that note, thank you very much for your time and insights. Elemental Reimagine Wildfire is going to be available, so just keep your eyes open for screenings around the world. By all means, do appreciate what firefighters do. Fire is not meant to be taken as a passing thing. Fire is dangerous, and do appreciate, as I say, people like the Grenfell disaster is still well in our minds, and in London, across the world. So thank you very much, Trip. To wrap up, this interview and others can be seen on my official YouTube channel, John Higgins Film Review. And you can also read more articles, interviews, and reviews on the Film and TV Now website, which is filmandtvnow.com. So on that note, thank you very much, Trip.
Thank you. And I'll just add that you can go to elementalfilm.com and click on streaming. On June 13th, it'll be live, and you can see it all over the world.
Great. Well, take a note of that, guys. That's the bit more additional information. But thank you very much.
Cheers. Thank you. Great talking with you.